So the first part of sewing is to get our string. So I'm going to take my embroidery thread and I'm going to pull it so that it's 3 arm lengths long, just like this, and cut it. Now it's time to thread my needle. I'm going to take a small piece of scrap paper and I'm going to cut it into a long skinny strip using my regular scissors. Now I'm going to fold this small skinny strip in half. It's going to look like a little mouth that opens and closes. I call it a duck mouth. Now I'm going to get my thread and my duck is going to eat that thread. So the mouth is going to open and the thread's going to go to the back of my duck's mouth. And I'm going to hold it like this with the mouth closed. This is what your thread should look like. Now I'm going to take that piece of paper attached to the thread and I'm going to put it through the eye of my needle just like this. So I'm going to bring the paper mouth inside, hold it together and pull it through, and that will pull my thread into the needle, and I want to leave like a tail of about like 6 to 12 inches long. So this is what it looks like when you put the paper and the thread through the eye of the needle. Next, I'm going to take the opposite end of my thread and I am going to tie it into a knot. So I am going to take my thread with my 2 fingers like this, and I'm going to use my other fingers to make a loop, and I'm going to cross the little tail behind the loop and into the loop, and then I'm going to pull the tail to make a knot. I like to make a double knot for the end of my thread, so I'm going to repeat the same thing. I'm going to make that loop, send the tail behind and through the loop, and pull and hope that it catches the same knot. Sometimes you have to try this a couple of times to catch the same place so that it's a double knot, but that's okay. So there, now I have my double knot at the end of my thread. Right now, I'm going to think about where I want to stuff my creature, and I want to stuff it at the top of the head. So I'm going to start sewing right there where the ear starts, and I'm going to start by going into the back of my stuffy. So the orange is the back, so I'm going to show you the running stitch first. So I'm going to pull the needle through the back into the orange, and the needle is going to come out on the yellow side. Now I'm going to pull and pull until I hit my double knot at the end of my thread. And then I'm going to go back into the yellow for the running stitch and out on the orange. And again, I'm going to pull, and sometimes we get some knots and we have to like lightly untangle them. If you pull too hard when you're untangling knots, usually that makes the knot tighter and harder to get out. So right here, I'm just kind of undoing the knot that happened while I was sewing. Okay, the knot is out, so I'm going to pull all the way into the yellow, and then I'm back on my orange side, so I'm going to stick my needle through the orange side. So I'm going into the orange and out on the yellow and pulling through. So here I just wanted to show you that a little bit closer. So again, I'm going to go through into the back of the orange, pull to the knot, and then I'm going to go into the front of the yellow and pull my thread through. And now I'm on the orange side, so I'm going to go back into the orange, out through the yellow, into the yellow, out on the orange, into the orange, out on the yellow. You're going to start to see like a dashed line on your fabric. So into the yellow, out on the orange, and into the orange, and out on the yellow. A second way to sew is to do the whip stitch. So again, I'm going to start at the ear and I'm going to go into the orange because the orange is the back of my creature, and I'm going to pull the thread until I get to the knot. And now I'm going to go into the orange side each time, wrapping the thread around the edge of my creature. So I'm going back into the orange and I'm coming out through the yellow. And this is what it looks like on a smaller scale. So I have my yellow and my orange cloth. I'm going to go into the orange, come out through the yellow, and pull all the way to my knot, and then back into the orange on the other side, wrapping that string around the edge of my felt. So I'm going to go into the orange again, out through the yellow, making sure that it loops around the edge. And again, back into the orange, out on the yellow. And just repeating these steps until I get a nice string of loops around the edge of my felt. For my demonstration piece, I decided to use the whip stitch where I am wrapping around the edge of my stuffed toy, and so I've just been sewing and sewing, repeating that same whip stitch over and over again. As you sew, it's really important to make sure that your stitches are not too far apart. If they're too far apart, the stuffing will come out. As I've continued to sew, my thread gets shorter and shorter, and so I don't want it to get any more shorter than this because it will be hard to sew. So right here, I'm going to need to get a new piece of thread. So I'm going to make a loop and send the tail through the loop just like we did when we began the double knots on our thread. And I'm going to kind of pull it down to the surface of the felt so that I have a knot on both sides of my sewing. If you don't make a knot on both sides of your sewing will undo. Here's a close-up of how you're going to tie both ends of your sewing. So once like my string is too small, I'm going to go ahead and loop it around my finger, and then I'm going to send that tail into the front of that loop. And I'm going to pull the tail and also pull the loop down towards the felt just like this. And I'm going to repeat the process so that it becomes a double knot. So now that I've got that knot completed, I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle again, just like I did at the beginning with a new piece of string. And so I'll get like about 2 arm lengths because I think that will be enough to finish my project. And I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread and repeat the process of threading my needle. Now that I have threaded my needle, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I've threaded my needle, I have a knot at the other end. I'm going to start again on the orange side, and I'm just going to continue sewing until I reach the part of my sewing that I want to stuff.